Their laughter didn't sound like joy. It sounded like knives clattering across the dinner table, sharp and careless. I had just tried to explain, gently, what it meant for me to live openly as trans, that it wasn't a phase, that it wasn't rebellion, that it was my truth. My father leaned back in his chair, lips curling into something bitter, and my mother followed him, a chorus of ridicule spilling out like they had rehearsed it. "Trans people don't deserve respect," he said, shaking his head with mock disbelief. My mother laughed in agreement, the sound thin and cruel, as though I'd just told the punchline of a bad joke. The words slammed into me harder than I could brace for. I felt my throat close, my fork frozen in midair. The smell of roasted chicken turned sour in my mouth, and the flickering light above the table seemed suddenly too bright, exposing every inch of my shame. I wanted to argue. To shout that respect isn't something earned by being convenient or palatable, it's the baseline of human dignity. But my voice stuck, caught between rage and grief. All I could hear was their laughter, echoing louder than my own heartbeat. In that moment, I wasn't their child. I was a spectacle. A disappointment. Something they thought they could strip of dignity with a laugh. And the silence that followed, the absence of anyone defending me, cut deeper than their words. I sat there swallowing humiliation, my chest tight, tears burning behind my eyes. I knew if I blinked too hard, they would spill, and I refused to give them that satisfaction. So I pressed my nails into my palm under the table, held my head high, and pretended the cracks in me weren't spreading. But deep down, something was already shifting, something they couldn't see. I left the table that night with my body intact, but my spirit bruised. Their laughter stayed with me, clinging like smoke to my clothes, crawling under my skin until I could barely breathe. Trans people don't deserve respect. The sentence rolled through my head as I shut my bedroom door and leaned against it, my chest rising and falling too fast, my heart thudding like I'd just run a race I hadn't trained for. I thought I'd grown used to their silence, their sighs, the way they avoided the subject whenever I spoke about myself. But I hadn't prepared for ridicule. There was something different about hearing your parents laugh at your existence, as though your entire being was nothing but a cheap joke to be dismissed between bites of dinner. I sat on my bed staring at the ceiling, replaying their voices. Every chuckle, every smirk, every shake of the head carved itself into my chest. I could almost see it, like graffiti scrawled across my ribcage, "You don't deserve respect." And the worst part wasn't that they said it, it was how easily I started to believe it. Memories rose like smoke from old fires. I thought of being 12 years old, standing in front of the mirror in the hallway, tugging at clothes that never felt like mine. My mother walked past, frowned, and muttered under her breath, "Why can't you just be normal?" I thought of being 16, trembling as I whispered my truth for the first time, only for my father to slam his palm against the table and say, "Not under my roof." Those words had stung, but I convinced myself time would soften them. I told myself love would eventually outweigh rejection. But that night at the table, their laughter told me otherwise. Time hadn't softened anything. If anything, it had sharpened it, honed their disbelief into mockery. And the silence from everyone else around the table, was louder than their words. Silence can wound deeper than insult. It said, "We agree. We won't defend you. You are alone." I curled into myself, trying to smother the rising panic, but memories kept unspooling. High school hallways, where kids shoved me into lockers, calling me names I can still hear when the room is too quiet. Teachers who looked away, who called me by the wrong name and expected me to sit there, invisible. Doctors who told me I'd regret this, who treated me like a phase instead of a person. It all collapsed together that night. Every rejection, every dismissal, Every cruelty wrapped itself into that single, cutting laugh. I wondered if maybe they were right. If maybe I was fighting for something I didn't deserve. If maybe respect was a prize for people who fit the mold, who never had to explain themselves at dinner tables or bite their tongues when their existence became the punchline. I hated myself for even thinking it, but in the quiet of my room, the thought burrowed deep. I picked up my phone and scrolled through photos, smiles with friends, snapshots of nights I'd felt free. But even then, a voice whispered, they wouldn't respect you either if they really knew. My hands shook, and I set the phone down, staring at the ceiling again. The pain wasn't just about them. It was about me, the part of me that still craved their acceptance even when it hurt me. I wanted them to see me, to know me, to love me as I was. But every time I reached for it, I came back with cuts. Tears came finally, hot and steady. I pressed my face into my pillow to muffle the sound. It wasn't just sadness, it was rage, too. Rage at them, at the world, at myself for still hoping. Rage that I could be their child and still be treated as less. Rage that no matter how much I tried to prove my humanity, they could laugh it away. The humiliation became a storm inside me. I thought of times I had stayed quiet to keep the peace, times I had swallowed my truth so they wouldn't turn on me. I thought of how many pieces of myself I had already given up just to sit at their table. And for what? To be laughed at? To be told, in their eyes, I would never deserve respect. It made me feel small, like a shadow of a person. But beneath the pain, I could feel something else stirring, a spark I wasn't ready to name yet. It flickered every time I replayed their laughter, every time I remembered the sting. Pain and rage are heavy, but sometimes, buried inside them, there is a seed. I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling my heartbeat beneath my palm, fast and uneven. I whispered to myself, "You do deserve respect. You do." But my voice was shaky, and I wasn't sure I believed it yet. Still, I kept whispering, because the alternative was silence. And silence was what had nearly destroyed me at that table. The days after the dinner blurred together, but the echo of their laughter didn't fade. It followed me into the shower, where the steam fogged the mirror but couldn't soften the words. It followed me into work, clinging to me like a shadow I couldn't shake. It sat at the edge of my bed at night, whispering itself into my dreams until I woke with a clenched jaw and aching chest. Trans people don't deserve respect. It was one thing to hear the world say it. I'd grown up with politicians on TV debating whether people like me deserved bathrooms or healthcare, whether our lives even counted as real. I'd survived the sideways looks from strangers, the snickers in public restrooms, the questions from coworkers who wanted to dissect me like a curiosity. But hearing it from my parents, delivered with laughter, as though my existence were nothing more than entertainment, was something else entirely. For a while, it crushed me. I went through the motions of life, but everything felt heavier, slower. I stopped speaking up in meetings at work, afraid my voice didn't matter. I avoided mirrors again, like I used to in high school, because I wasn't sure I could look myself in the eye. I canceled dinners with friends, telling them I was tired, but the truth was I was afraid they'd see through me, see the cracks widening inside. But at night, when I was alone, the anger came. Not the explosive kind, but the slow-burning kind that spreads through the veins, steady and relentless. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, fists clenched under the covers, and feel it rising. They had laughed at me. They had dismissed me as if I were beneath the dignity of respect. And I had let them. I had sat there in silence while their laughter rolled over me. That silence haunted me more than their words. So one night, when sleep refused to come, I sat up in bed, grabbed the pen and notebook I kept by my nightstand, and began to write. Not for them. For me. The words spilled out like a wound finally breaking open. I will not disappear. I will not apologize for existing. I will not let their shame become mine. Line after line, I wrote until my hand cramped. It wasn't eloquent, not polished or poetic. But it was raw, and it was mine. At the bottom of the page, I scrawled the words that had been whispering inside me since that dinner, no more. That became my vow. Not shouted into their faces. Not declared at the dinner table. But whispered into the quiet of my room, written into the margins of a notebook, stitched into the fabric of my chest. No more hiding. No more silence. No more letting them define me. The vow didn't transform me overnight. It wasn't magic. I still woke the next morning with the same heaviness in my chest. I still heard their laughter when I brushed my teeth, still flinched when I caught my reflection in the mirror. But something was different. The vow was there, humming beneath the surface, a current I could grip when the shame threatened to drag me under. I started repeating it to myself whenever the doubts rose. Walking to work, no more. Sitting at my desk, no more. Standing in the grocery store aisle, catching someone's stare, no more. Each repetition made it firmer, steadier. It was like laying bricks, one by one, building something solid inside me. But the vow wasn't just about surviving. It was about becoming. It demanded that I stop measuring myself by their standards, stop chasing after their approval like a thirsty child begging for water. It demanded that I start living for myself. That thought terrified me. What did it mean to live for myself, when all I'd ever done was contort my life to fit into their narrow frames? What would it look like to define my worth outside their laughter? I didn't have all the answers. But I knew I had to try. The vow fueled sleepless nights, my mind racing with plans and possibilities. I thought about the pieces of myself I had buried, the dreams I'd set aside because I thought they were too loud, too visible, too risky. I thought about the voice I had muted at work, the confidence I had strangled before it could breathe. I thought about the community I had kept at arm's length, too afraid of being too much even for them. No more. It wasn't revenge in the way movies show it. I didn't imagine shouting at my parents until they crumbled in regret. I didn't imagine storms of anger or dramatic walkouts. My vow wasn't about destroying them, it was about building me. The truest revenge wouldn't be their shame. It would be my joy. So I began to plan not how to hurt them, but how to outgrow them. How to live a life so undeniable, so full, that their laughter would echo hollow against the walls I built. The vow hardened in me with each passing day. When shame whispered, I whispered louder. When doubt clawed, I wrote more lines in my notebook. Some nights I tore pages out, convinced at first, transformation was quiet. Not fireworks, not a sudden unveiling of power, but small choices made in the shadow of that vow. I told myself if my parents could laugh at me for existing, then maybe I didn't need their laughter to guide me at all. Maybe I could write my own script, line by line, in ink they couldn't erase. The first change came in the mirror. For years, I'd looked at my reflection with hesitation, waiting for disappointment to leap out at me. My parents' words lingered there, not normal, not deserving. But one morning, instead of turning away, I stood and forced myself to hold my own gaze. "You are real," I whispered. "You are enough." My voice cracked, but I didn't stop. That moment became ritual. Day after day, I met myself head-on until the reflection felt less like a stranger and more like an ally. Then came my clothes. I'd always chosen outfits to soothe my parents' discomfort, to soften edges they couldn't bear. But the vow demanded honesty. So I started dressing the way I wanted, the way that made my shoulders loosen and my chest lift. Shirts that fit the lines of my body, jackets that made me feel sharp, shoes that gave me weight when I walked. The first time I stepped outside like that, my heart pounded, waiting for ridicule. But instead, I felt something new: alignment. The vow didn't stop at the surface. It began to shape my work, my voice. At the nonprofit where I'd been quietly working behind the scenes, I volunteered to lead a project connecting LGBTQ youth with mentors. The old me would have stayed silent, afraid of drawing attention, afraid of being too much. But the vow whispered, "No more." So I stepped forward, and when my proposal was accepted, I poured myself into it. The project became my lifeline. I sat with teenagers who looked at me with wide eyes, who whispered their fears about rejection, about family dinners that felt like battlegrounds. I told them the truth, that their pain was real, but so was their strength. That being trans didn't make them unworthy, it made them survivors, builders, dreamers. Each time I spoke those words to them, I heard them echo back into me, repairing pieces I thought were beyond repair. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was drowning in my parents' laughter. I felt like I was building something larger than their ridicule. Their dismissal became fuel, their cruelty the very reason I worked harder. Each sneer they had given me became a brick in the foundation of a life they couldn't touch. And beyond work, I found community. Thursday nights at the Queer Cafe became sacred. We gathered around mismatched tables, our voices overlapping in messy harmony. We told stories, some painful, some hilarious, and in those stories, I felt less alone. One friend hugged me after I shared my parents' words, her voice fierce, "You do deserve respect." Always. Her certainty became a balm I hadn't known I needed. The vow grew in those rooms, fed by the laughter that wasn't cruel, by the respect that didn't need to be earned. Slowly, I began to believe that my parents' definition of respect was never the measure of my worth. Transformation showed itself in unexpected ways. One evening, I was invited to speak at a local university panel on LGBTQ rights. Standing at the podium, my palms slick with sweat, I looked out at rows of faces, some skeptical, some curious, some quietly hopeful. I told them my story. I told them about the laughter at the dinner table, about the silence that followed, about the vow I made when shame threatened to suffocate me. And then I told them what came after: the work, the joy, the chosen family. When I finished, the applause startled me. Students approached afterward, some in tears, thanking me for putting into words what they'd been too afraid to say. One whispered, "I thought I was broken. But you make me think maybe I'm not." I walked home that night under streetlights, the vow burning steady inside me. I wasn't broken. I wasn't ruined. I wasn't undeserving. I was alive. And alive, I was unstoppable. But transformation wasn't about perfection. There were still nights when the old voices returned, whispering doubts. Times I lay in bed hearing my parents' laughter again, sharp as glass. Times when I wondered if their opinion would always sting, no matter how far I rose. But the difference now was that the sting didn't define me. I carried it, yes, but as a reminder of what I'd overcome. It fueled me, sharpened me, reminded me of the vow. Bit by bit, my life became bigger than their ridicule. I published essays about my journey, each one a defiance of their attempt to silence me. I stood on stages, my voice steady, declaring that trans people don't just deserve respect, we embody it, in every act of survival, in every breath of authenticity. And joy bloomed everywhere. In late-night drives with friends, music blasting and windows down. In the warmth of my partner's hand in mine, steady and sure. In the laughter that no longer cut, but healed. Looking back, I realized their laughter hadn't destroyed me. The invitation came in the form of a text message from my mother, dinner this Sunday. Come if you can. No details, no apology, no acknowledgement of the last time we'd sat together and how their laughter had branded me. Just a simple message, as though nothing had happened. For a moment, my thumb hovered over the keyboard, ready to type out "I can't." I thought about the safety of silence, of staying away, of protecting the fragile peace I had built without them. But then I remembered my vow. No more. I had grown since that night. I had built a life where respect was not withheld, where my existence wasn't mocked. I had stood on stages, spoken to crowds, mentored kids who saw me as proof that survival was possible. I had found joy that bloomed beyond their narrow walls. And now, the idea of returning to their table no longer filled me with fear. It felt like a test I was finally ready to pass. So I replied, "I'll be there." That Sunday, I dressed with intention. Not for them, not to appease their discomfort, but for me. A crisp shirt, a jacket tailored to my frame, shoes that clicked confidently on the pavement. As I drove, my stomach twisted with nerves, but beneath it all was something steadier, resolve. I wasn't going to beg for their respect anymore. I was going to show them that I no longer needed it. When I walked into the house, the familiar smell of garlic and onions hit me, pulling me back to countless dinners where I had swallowed silence like medicine. But this time, I walked taller. My father was at the table, my mother bustling in the kitchen, my brother scrolling on his phone. They all looked up when I entered. For a moment, the air shifted. My father's eyes flickered with something unreadable, my mother's smile too tight, my brother's smirk half-formed. I took my seat anyway. Dinner began in awkward small talk. My mother asked about work, her voice careful, as though skirting around something sharp. My father grunted, offering nothing more than muttered responses. My brother rolled his eyes at a joke only he found funny. I answered calmly, speaking about the mentorship program, about the essay I'd recently published. My voice didn't waver. I didn't shrink. Then, as if he couldn't help himself, my father leaned back in his chair and said, "So, are people actually taking you seriously out there?" His tone was flat, but the question was heavy with the same disbelief that had once cut me to the bone. For a moment, the room held its breath. The old me would have lowered my eyes, swallowed the words burning in my throat. But not anymore. I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "Yes," I said. "They are. Because I take myself seriously now. And that's enough." His jaw tightened, but he didn't reply. My mother fidgeted with her napkin, my brother snorted into his glass. I let the silence stretch, not as a wound this time, but as a mirror. Let them sit with the weight of my truth. Then my mother tried to laugh it off, her voice high and brittle. "You know, we were just joking last time. Don't take everything so personally." The words might have gutted me once. But I had learned that dismissals like that were another form of control, a way to minimize the harm they had done. This time, I didn't let it slide. "You laughed at me," I said evenly. "At people like me. And you called it a joke. But my life isn't a joke. I'm not asking for your approval anymore, I don't need it. But I won't sit here and pretend your laughter didn't hurt. It did." and it said more about you than it ever did about me." The table fell silent again. My mother's face flushed, my father's hands clenched on the tablecloth, my brother suddenly very interested in his phone. I didn't fill the silence. I didn't backpedal. I let the truth settle like stone. Because the real confrontation wasn't about shouting them down or demanding apologies they might never give. It was about standing in my truth, refusing to disappear, refusing to laugh along with my own erasure. Dinner stumbled on after that, conversation forced and stilted. But something had changed. The balance of power at that table no longer leaned toward them. I wasn't the fragile child begging for scraps of respect. I was the adult who had built a life beyond their laughter. When the plates were cleared and my mother insisted on a family photo, I didn't step aside. I stood where I wanted, shoulders square, gaze direct. The camera clicked, and I thought of that night when their laughter had made me feel like a blemish, a stain. Now, I was undeniable. As I left, my father muttered, "You've changed." I paused in the doorway, turning back to him with a, "After that dinner, I didn't walk away with their blessing. I didn't get an apology, no sudden change of heart, no teary embrace that erased years of hurt. What I got was silence, uneasy glances, and the faint tremor of recognition in their eyes, the realization that I was no longer theirs to belittle. And oddly enough, that was enough. Because I had spent years aching for something from them they were never willing to give, respect. I had begged for scraps, rearranged myself, swallowed pain just to sit at their table. But that night proved what I had begun to suspect all along: I didn't need their permission to exist. Their laughter had lost its power. Their silence no longer defined me. In the weeks that followed, I poured myself into living. Not surviving. Living. Work became a place where my vow took form in concrete ways. The mentorship program I'd started grew larger than I could have imagined. We paired trans and queer youth with adults who had carved their own paths, and each match felt like a victory over the voices that said we didn't deserve respect. When I saw a shy teenager light up as their mentor used their name without hesitation, I thought of myself at that age, how desperately I had needed that. Each small triumph was proof that I was building something my parents' ridicule could never tear down. Opportunities came, too. Invitations to speak at conferences, to publish essays, to step onto stages I never thought I'd deserve. Each time, I carried the memory of that dinner table with me, not as a wound anymore, but as fuel. Every microphone I held was an answer to their laughter. Every round of applause was louder than their dismissal. But the most powerful transformation happened in the quiet spaces. In Sunday mornings spent with my partner, making pancakes and dancing barefoot in the kitchen. In long walks with friends who had become my chosen family, our conversations spilling into the night with the ease of trust. In laughter, my laughter that healed instead of cut. I had once believed joy was something fragile, fleeting, something always at risk of being stolen. Now, I saw it for what it was: resistance. A rebellion. A declaration that I would not live small just because they couldn't see me whole. My parents still hovered at the edges of my life. There were birthdays, holidays, moments where tradition pulled us back together. Sometimes they still stumbled, still let a careless remark slip, still failed to meet me where I stood. But the difference was, I no longer twisted myself in knots over it. Their discomfort belonged to them, not me. Their laughter had once been a verdict. Now, it was background noise I could walk away from at any time. And walk away I did, not in bitterness but in strength. Because the real revenge was never about destroying them, it was about refusing to be destroyed. It was about joy that bloomed in spite of them, dignity they could not strip, a life too full to fit inside the narrow boxes they tried to force me into. Sometimes, I would look at the photos from my own gatherings, me in the middle of a circle of friends, smiling so wide it hurt, or me on stage with my hand raised, or me in quiet moments, face soft with peace, and I would think about my mother's words, my father's laugh. Trans people don't deserve respect. And I would smile, because I knew the truth. Respect wasn't theirs to grant. It was mine to claim. And I had. The regret, if it came for them, wasn't something I needed to witness. Maybe they looked at me and wished they had seen sooner. Maybe they stayed stubborn, clutching their laughter like a shield. Either way, it no longer mattered. Their voices no longer decided the shape of my life. What mattered was the vow I had made and kept. No more. No more hiding, no more shrinking, no more mistaking their shame for mine. I built a life out of that vow. A life stitched with resilience, lit by joy, fortified with dignity. A life where the best revenge wasn't anger, but thriving. And thriving, I did. They thought their laughter would break me. That by turning my truth into a punchline, they could shrink me back into silence. Trans people don't deserve respect, they said, and they believed it. But what they didn't understand was that their cruelty was not the final word, it was the spark. For a long time, I carried their voices like chains, dragging their scorn into every room I entered. I mistook their ridicule for reality, their dismissal for destiny. I thought if even my own parents couldn't see me, maybe no one ever would. But then I made the vow, no more. And that vow became my lifeline. Respect is not something they had the power to give or take away. It was mine all along, waiting for me to claim it. I see that now. Every step I've taken since, every voice I've raised, every life I've touched, those are the receipts of my worth. Their laughter has faded into nothing more than an echo, while my life resounds with joy, love, and dignity they can't erase. If they regret it now, that's theirs to carry. Maybe they lie awake sometimes, thinking of the child they laughed at and the adult who rose anyway. Maybe they don't. Either way, I am free. I don't live for their remorse, I live for myself, for the community that lifts me, for the younger me who once believed survival was impossible. The best revenge was never to make them weep for what they lost. The best revenge was this, to thrive in the face of their scorn, to live a life so undeniable that their words became powerless. To stand tall, visible, joyful, unforgettable. They tried to turn me into a joke. But I became the story they'll never forget.